So this is just a short video about the Dust Bowl and its relevance to Of Mice and Men. The world of Mice and Men makes clear reference to the Dust Bowl, primarily, I think, through its depiction of itinerant workers and their lifestyles. The Dust Bowl itself was a natural disaster of sorts. It was a series of droughts and dust storms that swept across Midwest America in the 1930s and really impacted quite severely on farmers and particularly small-time farmers. It led to poor crops, which, coupled with falling prices, meant that many families, men, weren't able to manage the loans and the debt that they'd got themselves into in the purchasing of the farms in the first place, which then in turn obviously led to banks repossessing the properties, rendering the farmers homeless. As a result of this, huge amounts of people affected by the Dust Bowl migrated to California. So it led to this mass migration to California, which was a state perceived to have land where land was plentiful and where there was work and there were employment opportunities. And these huge numbers made this journey across to California to the west. However, the reality of the situation was that California as a state became overwhelmed by migrant workers, and unfortunately, that obviously led to job scarcity and also a set of circumstances where workers were poorly paid. And I think you can really see that in the novel through men like George and Lenny, these itinerant migrant workers whose lives essentially lack any kind of security. Work, if there was any, at the very best was seasonal, and it was almost certainly poorly paid. I guess what's important to you as a student is this section here on how the consequences of the Dust Bowl are seen to manifest themselves in the novel. And I think that it manifests itself in a number of ways, or they manifest themselves in a number of ways, starting with the lack of relationships. So in the novel, all of the men, really, apart from George and Lenny, are seen to be lonely, isolated individuals that lack any kind of meaningful relationship with anybody else. I'm arguing that that's the product of the itinerant lifestyle, which was a product of the Dust Bowl. It made loneliness, isolation the norm. And you can see that when George and Lenny arrive at the ranch and everybody's immediately suspicious of them. Their relationship, the fact that they're a pair, is unique in the circumstances. Another way in which the Dust Bowl manifests itself in the novel, I think, is the lack of empathy that the men seem to have for one another. The world of Mice and Men, the world of post Dust Bowl America, was dog eat dog. Like I said, the jobs were scarce. People were having to look after themselves. It was a scenario of survival of the fittest. And people had to be ruthless. And so this individualist mentality arose, where people weren't necessarily compassionate. And I think you can really see that at the end of the novel. I think Carlson has the last line where he says something along the lines of, "What the hell do you think's eating them two guys?" He's so unempathetic. He can't understand how killing a friend could have any kind of emotional impact on somebody. Which leads nicely into another way in which the novel deals with the fallout from the Dust Bowl, the pragmatic and practical mindsets, natures of the men. I think in many ways the environment of the bunkhouse is a figurative, metaphorical reflection of that practical mindset. And a couple of instances where I think it's really shown in the novel is through the shooting of Candy's dog. Now that it's not a merciful killing. It's not a killing driven by compassion. It's one driven by practicality. The dog stinks. They don't like it. They want to kill it. And also the response to the murder of Curly's wife. When her body's found, people don't mourn her death. They don't grieve her death. They immediately have a practical response to it, trying to identify who was who was the murderer and how they're going to sort of catch him. And you can see that in the response of Curly, I think, very closely. Uh, I think there's a lot of violence in the novel, and you could argue that that too is a product of uh, the Dust Bowl, in that lots of the men in the novel in the 1930s were unfulfilled and frustrated, and that turned into violence. I think George says it. People, ranch hands get lonely, they get mean, they get wanting to fight all the time, and you can really see that. It's really sort of epitomised in Carlton, who seems really enthusiastic when it comes to violence. He owns a Luger. Uh, he shoots Candy's dog. He threatens to kick Curly's head off. Um, he's clearly enthused by it, and maybe that's a product of the fact he's living this unfulfilled lifestyle, and also the frustration that the workers must have felt, the itinerant workers, their lack of autonomy and control, I think George would be a nice one to look at in terms of, like, you often see his frustration, and finally, the, the the fears of the men. Particularly Candy, he's obviously terrified about what the future may hold, and I think that all ties back to this lack of security the men had, which obviously stems from the fact they're itinerant workers, which goes back to the fact that they lost their homes and livelihoods in the Dust Bowl. So ultimately, what is Steinbeck saying about the Dust Bowl? And I'm not sure he's actually sort of commenting on it particularly. Uh, I just think he's documenting it, he's capturing it, he's recording it, and I guess through doing that, he may be aiming to elicit a sympathetic reading of the characters. He wants us to feel sorry for them, and to therefore develop a compassionate interpretation of them.